Welcome, listeners of the Unexplained, to our dark frequency, where spine-chilling stories come to life. Today, I invite you to join me on a haunting journey through the halls of an old building and into what was hidden on the 10th floor. But beware, by the time the story ends, you'll never look at an elevator or a cup of coffee the same way again. After all, what could be more terrifying than the thought of being watched or poisoned? Get ready, because the reality here might be darker than any nightmare.
I didn't want to tell this story because, to this day, I'm not sure if it really happened or if it was just a hallucination from exhaustion. Some days I think I dreamed it all, but at the time, I was working in an old building in downtown Chicago. You know, those classic buildings full of history, with massive windows and elevators with manual gates. From the outside, it looked like a work of art, but inside, it felt abandoned. Almost like one of those creepy hotels from movies like The Shining. It was as if time had stopped, leaving marks on the walls, furniture, and even the smell, a mix of dust and dampness. I left work late that night, around 11. I was alone, as usual, because the overdue spreadsheets were my responsibility. Everyone else had already gone home, and all I wanted was to catch the last train and get to bed. The building was silent, and the hallways echoed every step as if something were hiding in the shadows, just waiting. When I got into the elevator, it was empty. The sound of the cables creaking and the slight jolt when the metal gate closed was almost comforting, familiar, but that night, everything felt more intense. I pressed the button for the ground floor and leaned against the wall. I just wanted it to go down quickly, but the elevator stopped on the 8th floor. The doors opened slowly, with that drawn-out mechanical motion. The floor was empty, as if everyone had vanished. Who would call the elevator and not get in? The desks were disorganized, chairs out of place, and the fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting moving shadows on the walls. I waited. Maybe someone had called the elevator and was coming, but the hallway remained still. No sound, no movement, just that absolute silence that makes your ears ring. The doors took longer than usual to close, as if they were waiting for something. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. But when they finally shut, the elevator didn't go down. It went up. Up? At that moment, I knew something was wrong. The elevator seemed to have a will of its own, ignoring my commands. But where was it taking me? My stomach turned. At first, I thought it was just a malfunction, but the bad feeling grew stronger. I pressed the button for the ground floor repeatedly, but it didn't respond. It went straight to the 10th floor. I didn't even know the building had 10 floors, or at least not officially. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was completely different. The light was dim, almost yellowish, and the air felt heavy, suffocating, as if it were hard to breathe. I can't explain it, but it felt like time didn't exist there. There was no sound, not even the faint hum of the elevator. Everything seemed wrong, and then I felt it, something no horror movie could have prepared me to face. I didn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. My body froze, every muscle locked as if I were paralyzed. I looked down the hallway, trying to find something, but all I saw was a dark stain on the floor at the far end. It looked liquid but dense, almost like oil, slowly spreading. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. The elevator doors began to close, but so slowly it seemed like something was holding them. In the last moment, I thought I saw a shadow next to the stain. I don't know what it was, but it felt like it was watching me. When the doors finally shut and the elevator started to go down, the sense of relief lasted only a few seconds. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. It felt like the elevator had become a trap, not a means of transport. But who, or what, was in there with me? The light flickered once, twice, and that's when I saw it. In the reflection of the metal wall, it looked like there was another person there facing away from me. Frozen, I slowly turned my head, but the space behind me was empty. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. On the contrary, it got stronger. When the elevator finally reached the ground floor, the doors opened way too slowly, almost in slow motion. I practically jumped out, but the lobby, which should have been brightly lit, was dark. The lights flickered weakly, and no one was there. Not even the security guard. Nothing. Just silence and that heavy air. The sound of the elevator returning to the 10th floor felt more like a warning than a normal motion. But what did it want? I ran to the main door, but it was locked. I had never seen it locked before. That's when I heard the elevator behind me. It was going up, slowly as before, stopping at every floor. Then it began to descend. I grabbed my phone to call someone, but I had no signal. I looked at the elevator panel as it came down, feeling the air around me grow colder. When it reached the ground floor again, the doors opened. I didn't look directly, but the air grew so cold that my fingers started to hurt. I don't know what was inside, but I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Wet. As if something was stepping out of the elevator and walking toward me. I don't know where I found the strength, but I ran to the exit door and forced the lock with everything I had. I managed to break it and ran outside. Out there, the air felt lighter, but when I looked back, all the building's lights were off. Even so, the elevator was still there, its doors open, and deep inside, in the dark, I saw it. It wasn't a person. It was something, standing there, watching me. Before I could do anything, the security guard came running. He said something about locking the building for safety while sorting out an issue with the power company. He mentioned we were without electricity and apologized for the inconvenience. But if we were without electricity, how had I used the elevator? And most importantly, who was in there with me?
I've never told this story to anyone, not even my closest friends. I don't know why, but back then, I was afraid of sounding crazy or having people think I was making it up. But now, sharing it anonymously like this, I think I can finally talk about it. Maybe it'll even help me understand what happened. This was about 4 years ago. I had just started working as a freelancer and spent a lot of time at co-working spaces. I loved the vibe. It was different from a regular office, you know? There was this mix of people quietly focused on their own tasks, with just enough background noise to somehow make me feel more productive. The place I used to go to was beautiful, super modern, with light wooden shared tables, plants hanging from the ceiling, and colourful couches scattered around. They always played soft background music, like jazz or lo-fi, and the place smelled amazing. Fresh coffee mixed with lavender from the diffusers. I loved that place. It felt like the perfect setting, almost like one of those co-working spaces you'd see in shows like The Bold Type. But what started as a perfect refuge for work turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. Over time, I started noticing odd things. I can't quite explain it, but the atmosphere began to feel strange. The first thing that caught my attention was the clock. There was a huge wall clock in the back of the main room, right above the cubicles. It was always stopped, but never at the same time. I remember joking with the staff once, saying someone needed to replace the batteries. But after a while, I started to notice that when I was there alone, the hands on the clock would move. Not quickly, but just enough for me to notice. And look, I'm the kind of person who tries to rationalise everything, so I thought, it must be a mechanical issue, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't just the clock. That was only the beginning of something much bigger. At night, when the place started to empty out, the cubicles cast these really strange shadows on the walls. I thought it was just the artificial lighting, but one evening, just as I was about to leave, I clearly saw a shadow move, and it wasn't mine. I convinced myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But the signs kept getting harder to ignore. Have you ever felt like someone was walking behind you? Not just paranoia, but an instinct. I started feeling that all the time, always at the same hour, between 10 and 11 at night. One time, I was focused on editing some text. I was deep in concentration, but out of nowhere, I saw something in the reflection of my monitor. Someone walked behind me, a black figure, quick. It was like something out of a horror movie, like Sinister. But the problem was, there was no director yelling, "Cut!" This was real. I turned around immediately, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway and that cold, artificial light illuminating everything. My heart was racing, but again I tried to brush it off. But the next night proved it wasn't my imagination. It was something more. The worst night was when I decided to stay late to finish a project. It was almost midnight, and I was the only one in the building. The silence was so heavy that I could hear the sound of my keyboard echoing. And then I heard it. The sound of chairs moving. You know that unmistakable screech of a chair being dragged across the floor? Yeah, that. I got up slowly and walked over to the cubicles. I looked around, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But every chair was in its place, perfectly aligned, all except one. It was turned directly toward where I'd been sitting. That chair didn't just look out of place. It felt like it had been waiting for me, like something had just gotten up from it seconds before I arrived. That chilled me to the bone. It felt like someone had been watching me or had left just before I showed up. I couldn't go back to my desk. I grabbed my things and left immediately. The next day, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I decided to talk to the security guard. He'd been there for years, always friendly, always up for a chat. I approached him, laughing a little to seem casual, and asked if he'd ever seen anything strange in the building, and in an instant, his smile disappeared. He got serious and stared at me for a while before answering. He told me that years ago, it had been a regular office, and there was a woman who worked late almost every night. One day, no one knows exactly why, she took her own life. It happened in the back of the main hall, near where the clock was. After hearing that, everything started to make sense. The clock, the shadows, the chair. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her. The guard said that since then, anyone who stayed late at night would start seeing things. Shadows, figures, footsteps, or even the sound of chairs moving. He tried to reassure me, saying she had never hurt anyone. But honestly, that didn't help. After that conversation, I couldn't stay late anymore. In fact, I stopped going there altogether. I started using other co-working spaces because after that, the place never felt the same to me. The strangest part is that even now, years later, I still dream about that place. Always the same scene. Shadows moving between the cubicles, as if something is lurking. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it happened. And the weirdest part, I found out the co-working space closed a few months later. They said it wasn't profitable, but honestly, after everything I saw, I think there's more to the story than they're letting on.
Look, I can't give you too many details because the case is still under investigation, but I had to tell you this. Seriously, I still can't believe it happened to me. I'll change the names here to make sure no one gets in trouble, but pay attention. This is surreal. I worked at an advertising agency. The environment was competitive, but at first, it felt like the healthy kind of competition. Everyone trying to stand out, grab the best projects, meet deadlines. It was exhausting, but kind of fun too. You know, like the vibe in shows like Mad Men. Intense but bearable. Then a supervisor position opened up, and things started to change. You know, when a workplace shifts from competitive to toxic. That's what happened. And at the center of it all was Lucas. I'll be honest, I really wanted that position. More money, more responsibility, more visibility. It was everything I'd been working for. But of course, I wasn't the only one after it. There was this guy, let's call him Lucas. He was the friendly type, always smiling, super helpful, seemed like a great person. But now that I think back, I realize he was playing a game no one else even noticed. Things started getting weird about 2 months ago. I felt sick at work out of nowhere. Dizziness, headaches, nausea that came and went. I thought it was stress because the competition for the position had ramped up the pressure on everyone. But it didn't go away. In fact, it only got worse. At the time, I thought it was just the fast-paced work environment, but now I see it wasn't stress. It was something much more sinister. There's one specific day I can't forget. I was in the break room, grabbing my usual coffee, when Lucas walked in with a cup in hand. He said something about making a stronger coffee for me, that it would help me stay sharp at work. I thought it was a nice gesture, so I took it and went back to my desk. Half an hour later, I felt like I was going to pass out. My stomach was in knots, my head was pounding, and I couldn't focus on anything. I had to leave work early. I thought it was something I ate, but after that, I started noticing a pattern. Every time I had coffee, especially the ones Lucas made, I'd get sick. And then the doubt that changed everything hit me. Was he doing this on purpose? Did Lucas want more than the supervisor position? Was he trying to take me out of the game entirely? That's when Anna got involved, a coworker of mine, super observant. I'll admit she had a paranoid side, but this time, I'm grateful for it. She started noticing that no one else in the office was getting sick, just me. One day, she pulled me aside and said she thought it was odd that Lucas always brought coffee for me and suggested I keep an eye out. At the time, I thought she was overreacting, but after she mentioned it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next time Lucas offered me coffee, I pretended to drink it, but threw it away as soon as he left. And the following day, Anna and I agreed to take some of that coffee to a friend of hers who worked in a lab. I needed proof, you know, when the results came back. It felt like a scene straight out of a psychological thriller, except I was the protagonist. But this was real. The coffee contained a substance called digoxin. It's a heart medication, but in the wrong dose, it can cause exactly what I'd been feeling: dizziness, nausea, mental confusion. And worse, it can lead to cardiac arrest. At that moment, everything clicked. The sickness, his insistence on making coffee just for me, even that friendly smile that now seemed more like a mask. He was poisoning me. Poisoning me. And why? For a promotion. To make matters worse, that same week, they announced Lucas had gotten the job. I couldn't believe it. While he was being promoted, I was struggling not to lose my mind over everything I discovered. I took the report straight to the police. I didn't think twice. They opened an investigation, but asked me to stay quiet while they gathered more evidence. Even so, just stepping into that office made my entire body tense up. I couldn't trust anyone, and I didn't know if Lucas suspected that I already knew. Even with the police involved, it felt like Lucas was still in control. The office felt like a chessboard, and I was the most vulnerable piece. The next morning, I handed in my resignation letter. I didn't care what would happen to Lucas, that job, or anything else. I just wanted out. Now here I am, trying to piece my life back together. You know those stories you never think could happen to you, but turn into a real-life nightmare? This is mine, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: from now on, I make my own coffee.
So, my brave listeners, what did you think of this descent into the abyss? Will you still dare to step into an elevator alone or accept that little coffee offered by your friendly coworker? Because let's be honest, the promotion might not come, but terror, that arrives quickly. Did you enjoy the story? Did it scare you? Or do you have an even more chilling experience to share? Leave your thoughts in the comments or send us your story via email. Who knows? Your experience might just be featured in our next video. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this with a friend who loves scary stories but always takes the stairs, just in case. See you in the next one, or maybe I'm already watching you right now.